Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Norfolk Select Board. We will kick off tonight's meeting in the same fashion as we normally do. Please join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, and for sticking with us through a couple of technical difficulties that are hindering our ability to be able to execute the Zoom portion of tonight's broadcast. But if you are hearing this, that means that you found us on YouTube, and the meeting will be posted later as well. So, Justin, would you mind taking us through our agenda this evening?
Yes, Mr. Chair. This evening, so we're going to have a water rate hearing. We're going to vote to approve the use of Towns Hill for a farmer's market. Request by our town clerk for a police officer detail for the presidential primary and town elections, as well as some dates for in-person early voting. Revisit and possibly vote on approving a written decision on a dog order from our previous December meeting. Have a discussion about unaccepted street policies.
Very good. Thank you, sir. So that'll bring us to our first item this evening, which is a public hearing on our FY25 Water Enterprise Fund rates. Justin, do we have to open a hearing?
Yes.
I move to open the hearing.
That's sufficient.
Beautiful. I'll second that motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It is unanimous. The hearing is now open. Justin.
So as typical, this is part of our kickoff of the budget processes, and water is going to be the first one that we talk about. We have Mr. Abrams and our DPW Director, Blair Crane, and they'll just walk through a presentation of proposed fiscal year 25 water enterprise funds.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, please come join us. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Please take it away.
All right, we'll start here. It's pretty loud there. We'll start here with an overview of the budget process, which we do annually, usually in the month of January or February. Matt Abrams has done a water rate study. It's been a number of years since we've done such a study to get an overview of what the future picture of the Water Enterprise Fund looks like. And we can have a brief discussion after that. Let Matt take it away.
All right, great. Thank you, Blair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Abrahams, part of the Abrahams Group, here to talk about water rates for FY25. I just wanted the group to be aware, though, that when we did this analysis, we didn't just look at FY25. We did a 5-year look, FY25 through FY29. Although rates are being set for FY25, we still wanted to see what the future would look like while we were focused on setting rates for FY25. So our analysis does go out 5 years, but we are going to keep things at a high level tonight as we focus on setting rates for FY25. So we do have a few slides for you this evening that will cover that overview. First slide is actually focused on the recent past. So the top table on this slide shows what rate changes have taken place over the last 6 fiscal years. That includes the current fiscal year of FY24. And it's a range of different changes. You can see that in FY19 there was no change. In FY20, I believe there were different changes in different tiers, 5% in FY21, 5% FY22. 2 years ago, last fiscal year, FY23, there was no change in the lower tiers. There was a 2% change in the upper tiers. And for the current fiscal year of FY24, there was no change. You can see in the bottom row of that table, that's the rates revenue that the town brought in each of those fiscal years. That's water rates, water user charges revenue. FY24 is a projected number at this point. Also, the bottom table shows a similar setup, except it's focused on the capital improvement fee, which was first implemented in FY20. And once it was implemented, each of the fiscal years since then, it decreased by the percentages that are shown there. And it is currently $1.30 per 1,000 gallons of water usage. Next slide, please. Financial results. So now taking it one step further, instead of just showing the rates revenue and the revenue brought in by the capital improvement fee, we're now showing all revenues on that top row for the last 5 most recent completed fiscal years of FY19 through FY23. Also, the projections for FY24 are shown in the rightmost column. The expenses are shown as well as a line showing the difference between the two, which we're calling our surplus and deficit line. In this case, it's all surplus for each of the years that we've shown. Water revenues have outpaced water expenses in the 6-year look that we have here. Down at the bottom are just some stats related to retained earnings. Retained earnings are reserves in your water enterprise fund that build up over time if revenue exceeds expenses. The most recent certification for retained earnings was just south of $3 million. That was certified probably about 3 or 4 months ago, would be my guess. And that is greater than 100% of the total water fund expenditures. We do like to look at the percent retained earnings compared to the budget itself. And that's what that means. We're also, because we think FY24 will end in a surplus, we expect it to grow at the end of this fiscal year. Despite being a usage year, you might think about the weather patterns recently. It was very wet last summer. So that generally leads to less outdoor water usage, and therefore usage was down. And despite that, and also spending $130,000 on vehicle replacement out of retained earnings, we're still projecting it to grow at the end of this fiscal year. That graph shows recent actual certified retained earnings. That's the blue line. You can see that it's gone upward the last few years. The red line is what we consider the target to be. That's just a target that we focused on. 20% of your expenses is what the red line represents. And you can see that the blue line is well above that and continuing to trend upward. So that means that it's a very healthy enterprise fund. If you look at just the status of the reserves and the fact that also in that top table, we have multiple years of surplus, no years of deficit. Next slide, please. So now we start to look forward a little bit, FY25, the water budget for FY25. When these slides were put together, it may have changed slightly because a debt number was just realized, but the budget at the time was $1.77 million, up about 6.2% from the prior fiscal year, which is the current fiscal year, and that was $1.67 million. That's FY24. The increases, we looked at what the differences were for the different line items. 35% increase in fuel and utilities, and also an increase in the reserve fund of $50,000. The debt number, there is additional debt that is coming on for FY25. We projected it to be $300,000. That was before we received that debt number that I just mentioned a moment ago, but the projections were pretty close. It was only off by about $40,000. But the total borrowings that were recently authorized at town meeting, $3.2 million. And if you annualize that, you're looking at about $300,000 in additional debt, which will be part of your FY25 budget. Even with that, though, we're projecting a small surplus in FY25. Whether the weather patterns allow for more outdoor water usage or not, we still think there will be a small surplus in FY25, despite the additional debt coming on. Next slide, please. And just so everyone's aware, that's without a rate change. Still a small surplus without a rate change. Long-term outlook. So starting to look forward even past FY25, I mentioned that we did a 5-year look in our analysis. The biggest piece of the puzzle to that is capital planning. What does that look like over the next few years? The town does have a capital plan for water, and the town reviewed it with me. We did include projections related to those expenses in our analysis, but most of the bigger ticket items, I'll call it, aren't hitting until later years. 3 or 4 or 5 years out is where the town currently thinks that spending, when the town currently thinks that spending will take place. So we don't have debt for that hitting until maybe FY27, FY28, FY29, somewhere in that area. But I just want everyone to be aware that if the town does move forward with this capital plan, those expenses will need to be provided for. And even though there's a nice surplus now with retained earnings as well being healthy, over time, based on our projections, those retainings would deplete without rate action. So that's kind of a longer-term outlook to be considering rate action in the outer years, but in the short term, there's not much, if any, need to increase rates. Here's the capital plan that we reviewed, $550,000 in FY26 for LCRR and lead service replacement, a water master plan update, and $80,000 in 26. Various water improvement projects for FY27, that's over $7 million. And new source development, FY28, $5 million. So those are some bigger projects that we're looking in the outer years of our analysis. And in addition to that, not currently in the capital plan, but on the radar of town staff are the requirements related to PFAS. And there is a possibility that treatment for PFAS has to take place in the future. Also something to keep in mind. So as I mentioned with my comments a moment ago, rates impact, none in the short term, but rate action likely in future years to help fund capital projects. In other words, if these capital items are to be funded, there will need to be rate action in the near future. But for the short term, we don't believe there needs to be rate action. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. So here is our recommendation for FY25 water rates based on our analysis and also some of the items that I've covered this evening. No rate change for FY25 water rates. So the top table shows the rates being the same in FY25 as they currently are in FY24. For the capital improvement fee, like in the past few years, the town has decreased that fee. And we think that the town can decrease that fee again if it so chooses. And we're recommending a 5% decrease there. So that would lower the fee from $1.30 per 1,000 gallons of usage down to $1.24 per 1,000 gallons of usage. And bottom line impact for that, it's not much. It really depends on the weather patterns, whether people use water, outdoor water usage, etc. But we think that reduction in revenue would be anywhere from $0 to $10,000 compared to FY24's number. Again, depending on weather patterns. For the average user's quarterly bills, we think that'll end up being about a $1 reduction to the average user's bill. So it's not a huge impact overall, but it is a decrease over what users pay today. Next slide, please. And then this is just housekeeping, this last slide. But there are other charges that water users receive on their bills, and we're not recommending a change for any of those, but we did want to show that on the slide, just so you are aware. That's the service charge, which is semi-annual, that's tied to a meter size. The fire protection charges and backflow inspections we have as not changing for FY25. And Mr. Chairman, those were all the comments that I had prepared for this evening, so happy to take questions and comments at this time.
Very good. Thank you so much. First and foremost, Blair,
Yes.
would you mind talking to us a little bit about the current PFAS situation here in Norfolk and what the outlook looks like in that foreseeable future?
Absolutely. So PFAS, so for the average person, PFAS there are multiple PFAS. The federal government looks at the 6 most common. They call them the PFAS 6. Right now, that's what we test for. Those 6, they have long chemical names to them, but those 6, we currently test for those 6 at each of our 3 well sites. Holbrook Street well, the latest test came back having 0 PFAS. The Gold Street came back with 2.93 parts per trillion. And Spruce Road came back with 10.25 parts per trillion. The limit for a violation is 20 parts per trillion. So we are certainly well within where we need to be. Last fall, the federal government was discussing the possibility of having a nationwide PFAS program where they would set whatever the limit was going to be. There's been discussion that could get on to 4 parts per trillion, but they were talking about having some sort of legislation put through in the fall. That never happened, and there's a possibility now, late spring, maybe March, April, but still the numbers being kicked around. So it's really just speculation at this point. So Although I do think that at some point, this will become a national issue. In order for, there are certainly even local towns that are in worse shape than we are. We are currently where we need to be. If it was to get down to 4 parts per trillion at this point, we would most likely have to mothball the Spruce Road plant at 10.25 parts per trillion. But Gold Street at 2.93 falls within whatever the federal guideline would be, and with Holbrook at 0. And with new source development being looked at, I'm pretty optimistic within the next 3 or 4 years. We'll have a pretty good idea of what the federal government's going to do, and B, I think that our capital plan, with the amount of money we have in retained earnings, financially, I think we're in a good spot, and depending on how things go. And it would be extremely rare for the federal government to flick a light switch and say, within 12 months, you've got to take care of this problem.
Yeah.
I mean, hypothetically would say they were 4 or 5 years out from, there's certainly a lot of towns throughout America that aren't going to be able to deal with this overnight. So I would say that you're probably in a 4 or 5 year timeline before they really get serious about having to deal with this. And, PFAS has been around forever. We've just gotten better at testing for it. This isn't something that happened overnight. These are tests that we've figured out, and, it's the newest, latest, and greatest thing. So I think the town is in a great spot where it is. We can always do better, but from all the aspects, from the unknowns to our financial picture, I think we're in a good shape.
Perfect, thank you. And just one quick follow-up question to that. I do know that there are a couple of our neighboring communities that have made significant investments into
Yes.
dealing with much different situations when it comes to
Yes.
elevated levels of PFAS. Can you just give us a ballpark number of what we'd be looking at in terms of investment if we did have to address an elevated problem?
Hypothetically, I would say we're probably in the 5 million range, give or take, if we had to put in a plant to treat our water. And that's hypothetical. Who knows what it's going to be 5 years from now with the
Right.
cost of everything accelerating, but that's what's in our capital plan to work toward that number. So if we get to that point where we have to invest, I think we're economically ready to do that.
Perfect, thank you so much, I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Other questions from the board? Jim?
Yeah, a couple. First, thanks. Thanks for a thorough presentation. New well sources has always been an issue for this town. And if we were to have to shut down one of those wells, Holbrook is in many respects backup in some regards. And, Holbrook is, I think, 5 years old?
Holbrook's been online it went online since I've been here, so it's 2 years, 2.5 years.
So it's
Yeah.
fairly new.
Yeah.
And where are we in other sources? Because it's been a constant battle for as long as I can remember.
Well, the benefit of Holbrook is that it's a well field instead
got
of
5 wells, I
It's
think,
6
doesn't it?
wells.
6 wells.
Yeah, so we run 3 at a time and then another 3, and we switch back and forth. So that's really the benefit of Holbrook, is the fact that it's got many wells, so you're not really tied to one or the other. The other 2 sites each have 2 wells.
Right. So, and they're older.
And they are.
sites.
Spruce Road is approaching the end of its life.
Yeah.
It's been fracked a couple of times. We clean it out, but it is within a couple of years, probably the end of its life. So
So it's not a crisis from your view?
it's not a crisis. I believe that with Holbrook being new, that it supplies more than enough at the moment. But we should always look, especially with the amount of new homes going in Norfolk, that we constantly need to be looking for more water, and we are doing that.
Do you have any sites that you're,
There are-
without necessarily naming, do you have any sites you're considering?
There's 2 that I think are decent material to supply water with. Obviously, there's maybe some issues, but there is one on the south end of town and another on the north end of town.
Okay.
So.
And one other question, just on the capital improvement fee, with all that we're looking at potentially in the future, why wouldn't it make sense just to hold that?
You could hold it. I think the capital improvement fee was something that was installed before I got here.
Yeah.
Looking at, the possibility of 5 million out there, I hate to, make it any more than it is, but at the same time, I'm not sure that we really need it. The numbers that I have from 22 and 23, when we adjusted the rates, we've used less water, but ended up with more money in the account. From 22 to 23, even though we pumped 5 million gallons less, we ended up with $100,000 more. And being at a time where, I think utility bills are hopefully at their peak, that, it's, if we can afford to do that, I just hate to tax people for expenses that aren't necessarily there.
I'm never advocating for not reducing a cost. That's not my point, but I
No.
do know we have some substantial costs looking in the future, and it's not a lot of money, but it is meaningful money.
True.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. That's it.
Nita?
I had questions that I think you've answered about if there were other strategies other than closing down the Spruce Road well in terms of mitigating, but it sounds like that's near the end of its life and that
It is.
isn't a reasonable response. And then just a logistical question about the Holbrook wells. You said there's 6 wells on that property, and I'm wondering, are they all to the same aquifer, or are they
Yes.
at different depths? So they're all in the same aquifer,
Yeah,
but
they're all
so
part
we're
of the
talking about
Charles
pump
River.
function more than water possibility.
Yeah, so they're all part of the Charles River watershed out there, as the Gold Street well is also part of that, and then the Spruce Road is part of the 10-mile watershed. There are backup systems out there, so that if we do end up with any issues, that is one of the highest pressured parts of town, so we are pushing back against the system when we pump from there toward town, toward the tanks. But everything does have a dual system out there, so that if we run into any issues with one set of wells, we can easily, even remotely at this point, shut one set down and start up another.
Without impact. So just for my own edification, not really related to the water rate, but the 3 and then 3 and 3 and 3 is to, for equipment reasons, right? To rest your equipment, or for water reasons?
Both. So and that's why each of the other wells has, 1 and 1. So that we never run them both at the same time. You want to run one, normally we'll run one for a couple of days and then switch it over to the other bank, let one rest. You just do that for both. You want to obviously let the equipment rest as well, but it's mainly for the water.
Okay, and then my last question was about the capital improvement fee as well, and I was wondering if there's any, it's lovely to see it go down, and I'm happy, and that reflects the hard work that you're doing, so thank you. But I wonder if there's a way for it to be going down for our lower water users, so we're rewarding folks for using less water, and have it be some kind of a scale, or is that just incredibly complicated and does not make sense?
Well, I think a couple of years ago, when I was new to the position, I came to you and we talked about water conservation, right? It was to essentially try to minimize the lower tiers to the best of our ability, while the upper tiers had to pay more. And that's, and as Matt and I were going through this, that was fairly evident. And the numbers show that plan has worked, because we've had more users than and from 22 to 23, we went up 38 users, but we pumped 5 million gallons less. But at the same time, we gained $109,000. That means to me that space has gathered. The people in the first 2 tiers are using less than ever, and the upper tiers are using more than they've ever used. So it's hard. It is difficult to kind of do that. That's why the capital fee, for all intents and purposes, was across the board,
Perfect.
just to make that as simple as possible. But yeah, we've really looked at this a lot of different ways to try to make it as fair as possible for everybody.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. No other questions?
Very good. Well, I think that having answered our questions, our next step is to continue the public hearing to our next meeting to allow the public the opportunity to be able to chime in on any thoughts, opinions, or anything they'd like to share with the board before we vote on a final rate come the 27th, correct? Very good. Anybody on the board have anything else for Matt Blair? Gentlemen, thank you guys so much. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
I will also entertain a motion to continue our public hearing until February 27th.
I move to continue the public hearing until February 27th. The
Second.
water rate public hearing.
Hearing a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Very good. All right. Back to our agenda. We will open it up for public comment now, the period where anybody who is in attendance or not on Zoom tonight, in attendance sounds good, would like to share with the board, you have the opportunity to do so. Is anybody interested in public comment this evening? I am seeing no interest in public comment this evening, and moving on to item number 3. The vote to approve the use of Town Hill for the following events: the farmers market and all the farmers markets. Justin?
Yes, so this evening, asking the board to approve the farmers market this year from June 5th, 2023 to September 25th, June 5th, 2024, through September 25th, 2024, from 2 to 8 p.m. We've asked police, fire, and DPW. They have no concerns in terms of those dates, in terms of the event, and those dates don't conflict with any other dates. So I think it's all set to move forward.
Anything you'd like to share about the event, or any changes, things to nothing?
We're staying the course. We're trying to add as many new local vendors as possible. Still working on weekly food trucks, some live music. So food trucks seem to be a big draw, so
Absolutely.
that's our focus.
Fantastic. I did notice that they are going until 8 p.m. on this. Have they been going until 8 p.m. previously?
For cleanup, yeah.
Got it. Okay, so it wouldn't necessarily be
It just
vendors.
takes an hour for us to pack our cars up.
Gotcha. Perfect. That was my only question. Jim, you have any?
No, except it's a great
No
event.
questions, thank you.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it. June feels so far away. We'll get there. I would entertain a motion to approve the farmers markets to be held on Wednesdays from 2 to 8 p.m. from June 5th through September 25th, 2024.
I move that we approve the use of Town Hill for farmers market from 2 to 8 p.m. on Wednesdays from June 5th, 2024 through September 25th, 2024.
Second.
Hearing a second, any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tried to tee it up for you so you could just say.
You
so
did,
moved.
so moved. Oh, and I didn't pick it up.
3 to 7.
Yeah, 3 to 7.
3 to 7 is when the farmer's market will be open.
The operational hours are
But they're
3 to
allowed to
7.
use the hill till 8 because
1
they
hour
need
for
to clean
setup,
up.
Right.
1 hour for cleanup. Got it.
Gives us forever.
For the public.
Yes, 3 to 7 for the public.
Yes.
Well, if you keep it the way it is, you might be able to get some help for cleanup.
Ready? Right.
All right. Our next item this evening is to vote to approve a request by the town clerk for a police officer detail for March 5th at the presidential primary election. Justin?
Yes, as the board's aware, the legislation that passed in 2022 states that, the select board has to authorize a sufficient number of police officer details for voting. So this is part of our sort of now multi-annual process that we do. Our town clerk, Ms. Green, has spoken with Chief Hines. They've come up with the sufficient number of police officers for these details, which has been what it's typically been, which is 1 officer outside the polls and 1 assigned for morning drop-off. So we're just asking for that official vote by the select board regarding the detail officers.
Is there any reason in particular that we're not doing this for the state primary and state general elections in November and September as well? Or we're just doing that at a later meeting?
We're doing it at a later meeting.
Got it. Cool. Just wanted to make sure there wasn't something that differentiated the requirements for those. All right. Any questions, Jim?
No.
Questions, Anita?
None whatsoever.
None on my end as well. In that case, I will entertain a motion to approve.
I move the board approve 1 detail officer assigned outside the polls from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on March 5th, 2024 for the presidential primary election, and 1 detailed officer assigned for the morning drop-off and afternoon pickup on May 7th for the annual town election.
Second.
Hearing a second, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. All right, our next item is to vote to allow early in-person voting for the May 7th town election. Justin?
Yes, so for the past several elections, we have offered early in-person voting. So this is another process. For May, our town clerk has proposed the following dates that are included in the agenda as opportunities for early in-person voting. So if the board so wishes, I'd like to offer that.
Absolutely. Anita, any questions?
No, I appreciate Carol's diligence in making opportunities for our citizens, so that's amazing.
Jim?
No, it's a good thing.
Very good. No questions on mine either. So in that case, I will entertain a motion to approve.
I move that the board allow early in-person voting for the annual town election scheduled on May 7th as printed in the agenda.
Second.
Hearing a second, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 And that is unanimous. Thank you. Our next item is to vote to approve and issue a written decision in order that a dog owned by Jill and John Lawrence is a dangerous dog. I believe this is a follow-up from a previous dog hearing that we had. Justin, what else do we have for this evening?
So this, your chair's correct, this was a previous hearing that the board did deem the dog is dangerous, but they had authorized the animal control officer to work with the owner with some proposed mediation of this issue. Hillary Cohen has worked with Ms. Lawrence, and she provided a list of recommendations for the board. I included her email as well as her recommendations in a summarized memo for the board's consideration. Obviously, the board can decide to do something else if it so wishes, but her proposed recommendations is part of this memo. And she's here if you have any other questions, but she doesn't have anything to add unless you have questions for her.
Hillary, anything that you'd like to come up and discuss, or just a point of reference for any questions we might have?
Just a point of reference.
Perfect, thank you. So after reviewing the email and the memo, I actually don't have any questions. Jim, do you have any questions?
No, nor do I. No.
I don't have any questions either. I was pleased to see the partnership. Sometimes the dog hearing doesn't end so smoothly, and it was nice to see the partnership between the town and Jill, so that's amazing.
And I want to acknowledge our animal control officer went back and forth with Jill to find a correct solution or a proposed solution for this order. So we hope that this works for everyone.
Excellent.
Having, addressed a couple of these situations where we didn't necessarily have such collaborative-minded folks on the other side of this, it was kind of refreshing to see the Lawrences be as engaging as they've been and been so committed to ensuring that the safety of the community is paramount. So thank you to both Jill and John for that. And thank you, Hillary, for working with them as well.
Absolutely.
With that, I will entertain a motion to approve.
I will move to approve the written issued decision in ordering the dog owned by Jill and John Lawrence as a dangerous dog.
Second.
Is there
Do we
a
have to say
more
name Blue?
comprehensive?
Yeah, I think the
Well,
board,
I don't like that emotion either.
I think the board deemed it dangerous before. I think you might want to vote on the record.
Well, we already did deem it a dangerous
Exactly.
dog, so if I recall.
You're correct.
So we're voting to approve and issue
Right.
the written decision as opposed to, do we have to
Yeah.
go through each of the line items?
Yeah.
We do, okay.
Because it's not included in the agenda, so, and this is going to be an actual written document that I will have to produce for it.
We'll have to pull that up. Do you have yours written there?
I do have it
Okay,
right here.
You go.
So I'm going to just, I'm going to add a friendly amendment to what Jim started here and then vote to approve and issue a written decision in order that the dog Blue, owned by Jill and John, is a dangerous dog, and the following orders are recommended. The owner shall install posts and wire mesh fencing in the backyard and has agreed to this by the animal control officer. The owner shall provide proof of liability insurance in the amount not less than $100,000 for the dog. The dog is leashed when walking from the house to the kennel area if the fencing does not encompass the egress point. The dog is leashed with a high tensile leash and Baskerville muzzle when off the premises of the owner. Is there
I will
anything-
second.
Hearing a second, do we have any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. And that is unanimous votes. Thank you so much once again, Hillary.
Thank you, Hillary.
I want to echo Hillary as well, the cooperation that you received, and these are very uncomfortable situations, but you have people that care for both sides of the equation, so it's worked out well. Thank you.
They certainly are contentious usually, and this was wonderful.
But you also handled it with grace and dignity, so thank you for that.
See what tomorrow brings.
Thank you.
Have a good night, Hillary.
You as well.
Thank
Good night.
you. That'll bring us to our first discussion item for the evening, which is a review of the unaccepted street policy. Justin.
Yes. Mr. Chair, so we have our DPW Director, Mr. Blair Crane here, just to provide a high-level picture of why we're having this conversation. As the board is aware, there's many unaccepted streets within the town, and technically speaking, there shouldn't be too much town use of funds on maintaining unaccepted streets. There has been more of a demand for funds for services on unaccepted streets. So one thing that Blair and I have talked about is having a formal policy, because it puts us in a difficult situation to do one-offs for people, and we want to make sure we're adhering to the policy recommended by the board and town meeting eventually. So this is kind of kicking us off towards articles potentially for town meeting. I'd like Blair to just talk about the unaccepted road situation now, and what we're hoping for is guidance whether you agree with our assessment that we should develop a policy and propose that for a proposed article for town meeting.
Sounds good. Welcome back, Blair.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. So, unaccepted streets create a serious gray area. They can range anywhere from paper streets that never actually even became roads. The planning board laid them out on paper. For whatever reason, they never became streets. But as you look at property lines and whatnot, you can still see that they're there. There are abutting landowners to those that come up with issues such as trees, for instance, and say, well, that's a town road. They're not you couldn't walk through there, but because on paper they look like a street. So you get into that conversation. From there, you move on to gravel roads. There are a number of gravel roads in town that are unaccepted. Even in a couple of gravel roads that have water mains under them, but they were never accepted by the town and would not meet town standard. They're too steep, they're not wide enough, a variety of issues. Because they're steep, they wash out all the time, so that puts the DPW in an issue where you may need to bring in material, right? So now you're using material that's taxpayer funded to put into this roadway, which is not a town road legally, so there's an issue there. Beyond that, then you get into asphalt roads that have potholes, drainage issues, trees, a variety of problems. So obviously there's a lot going on here, and I try to deal with each one on a case-by-case basis, but it's becoming more and more to the point where, Justin and I have had to work together to try to solve a lot of these problems. And it's a difficult topic to kind of a one-size-fits-all, because everyone's a little bit different. We're talking about 42 roads in
Wow.
total. So this isn't a small issue. There's 10 gravel roads, 28 asphalt roads, and 4 paper streets. And then you get into all kinds of issues there. So I kind of look at it from I've had this problem in my career before. I look at it as there are taxpayers on those roads. They pay their taxes, and a bare minimum, they deserve to have emergency services, right? So at a bare minimum, they should have access to fire, police, ambulance. During a snowstorm, obviously, we plow them for that. We try to do minimal maintenance that we can. But again, now you get into a spot where is that line? So, I try to use my best judgment to say that, an ambulance can get down this road without assistance, but, residents want, excellent roads. They pay a lot of taxes, and so that's where we get into an issue. So, some things that I would ask that, we look at as, this conversation moves forward. Thinking about I've looked at a lot of other towns and what they have done over the years, and of the 351 towns in the Commonwealth, no two have the same, no two have the same policy. It is all over the place. So I just had a couple of bullet points here that I thought that we should probably consider, and depending on how this all pans out. One of them is that if we, obviously if we decide going forward that we want to allow taxpayer money to be used to fix roads, that we possibly put a monetary cap on what we can spend in any fiscal year. A number of towns in the Commonwealth have capped it at as little as 1,000, as much as 10,000, depending on the amount of roads that they have. But I think that that's not a terrible idea. It gives you a little bit of a budgetary stop there if you need it. A lot of towns have, they limit the type of work that can be done on a road. Like they limit no drainage improvements and no tree work. Consider limiting asphalt repairs to, minor repairs, potholes, that sort of thing. Gravel roads, I would consider maybe to state grading twice a year, with additional grading at the direction of the Director of Public Works. That way, if that gives you the leeway to say, okay, we're going to do this in the spring after the winter months, and again in the fall. And if we get a storm throughout the winter and or the summer, whatever season, and for whatever reason the road washes out, whatever, it gives the director the leeway to go back there and do it a third or fourth time. Obviously, there's an expense to that, but I think that's a judgment call that you need to be able to make in the field depending on what the weather does. So those are just some main issues that I think should be thought about, and minimums at best. They're just, like I said, there's 351 towns and none of them have the same policy. So it's all over the gambit, especially in a town like Norfolk, where we have, from paper streets to gravel roads to paved roads. There's a lot out there. So a lot to try. It's hard to encompass one broad stroke here to solve all the problems. But at the end of the day, I think that it's something that should have been looked at a while ago, and the state statutes do give us the leeway to do that legally. So that's all I have for now.
So, Blair, let me just ask you a question to kick it off. Having been on the planning board and watching the process go from site plan review to bond release to the approval of streets and all the recommendations that come with it, what are some of the various instances or variables that contribute to a vote of a road never being accepted, whether it be at the end of the process or whatnot, or just give us some examples of ways that happens.
I think sometimes, obviously there's a lot of history here in Norfolk. Sometimes it's the developer walked away, sold his lots and his houses, and there's an expense to finishing off a road or going through the finalization of the process. I think that happens sometimes. There are paper streets that, they went through the planning board process, they were approved, and the economy changed, or for whatever reason that never happened. MacArthur is a great example of that. Comes down off of the hill right there. If you were to look at that road today, and we have looked at it recently, the grade is too steep there. Chief Kinney has stated that, by today's standards, that would never cut it because you couldn't drive a fire truck up it. It's too steep. So there's, as times change, there's a number of reasons why they don't get built or get built to a certain standard. So that would just be two instances that I can think of off the top of my head. And
then to that end, and that was a great example, if the town were to take ownership of that street today, now the town would be liable to have to make those adjustments and incur the cost to do so.
Absolutely.
Which isn't necessarily fair to the other residents of the town. So I understand the balancing act that needs to be done to be able to appropriately accommodate for the proper maintenance of these roads and afford residents who have probably turned over 2 or 3 times now, right? Since the development went in and had no idea.
Wiley Road is a great example of that, because I believe, looking back through the history of all of those lots are exactly the same size. So they were probably camps back in the day. They needed road frontage in order to subdivide that whole piece up. I mean, they're small lots. They're like 100 by 50. I mean, there's nothing there. But they needed that road frontage. So on paper, there's your road frontage. It's a steep dirt hill. And so, technically it's a town road. Those are taxpayers on that road. And those camps now are homes that people live in year round. So the use of the land has changed over time, and the road hasn't caught up with it. So it's difficult because, on one side, it's not a town road. by the definition of town road. And that's what I'm hoping, that we find a way here to be able to encompass those roads without technically owning those roads.
Yep. And then one final question before I pass it off to my fellow board members. As it stands right now, there aren't roads that you, while out plowing during a storm, say, nope, we're not going to do that one, let's move on to the next one. You guys take care of every road in
Yes.
town as it stands today. Gotcha.
Absolutely.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yep.
Anita?
So my first question sort of reflects my ignorance in the process, but we wouldn't accept a road as the town, we wouldn't accept it unless it was up to our standards?
Correct.
So in order for them to bring the road to the town, it would have to be ready to rock, to our level of...
Some roads are geographically incapable of meeting the standard, today's standard. Back when a lot of these roads, some of these roads were made, some of them are very recent, and it's really paperwork in order to accept them. Some of them are from 60, 70, 80, 100 years ago, and will never meet today's standard, so a fire truck can get up or down it. And that's kind of where it lies. Is that some of them don't have enough of a right-of-way. So that even if we were to accept it, now we run into other issues. So there just are going to be a handful of roads that no matter what we do are never going to meet the town's current standard. So that's really where we're at.
So then I have a couple of thoughts. First of all, I think to protect you more than anything, or to, in the interest of public information, it might be valuable to once in a while notify people that say, just so you know, this road hasn't been approved by the town. We're continuing to plow to the best of our ability, but we want you to know, so that they understand a difference in service, because they must see a difference in service, and then you must take the heat of that difference, right? And so doing some kind of public notification of those people that live on roadways that are not approved might be beneficial for you. And I think the idea of having some kind of guidelines would be good. I think I'd rather have them be guideline than policy, because I'd like you to have the discretion to say, we've got a 6-year-old who has seizures every week, and we really need to do a different kind of attention to this road during this time period. So I'd like you to still be able to make some, I wouldn't want to create a policy that tied your hands if you felt, in your opinion, that needed to be handled differently. But I think we are going to need policies, otherwise you're going to spend all day long saying, should I do this road or this road? Or that's impossible. That's an impossible.
We spend a fair share of our time now on this very topic, and that's why Justin and I have worked so hard to get to this point, was because it really is a hot topic. And it may not be everybody, but I would say an extremely high percentage of residents in this town that live on unaccepted roads are aware that their road is unaccepted. We've had multiple discussions, and a lot of people don't understand what the difference is.
Right.
Right? So a developer went in, he put in this development, he's long gone, they're the second or third owner to this house, it's got sidewalks, it looks beautiful, it's got granite curb. He doesn't understand that technically his road is an unaccepted road. The town does not have authority
Right.
on your street. That's not to say we don't plow it, and again, I always fall back on, our emergency services open here, regardless.
Absolutely.
It may not be as smooth as it possibly could be, but, if your house is on fire, or you need medical attention, or you need the police, there's nothing keeping you from getting here. And even during a snowstorm, one of us always monitors the radio, and if, unfortunate enough they need emergency services, a truck is always dispatched to that road to be there long before anybody else shows. So from that perspective, there's no difference in services. But where it comes down to maintenance of the road itself, potholes, trees are always a big deal. And again, if a tree falls in the middle of a storm and it's prohibiting emergency services, we'll go out there and cut it down, push it off to the side of the road, but that's where it gets sticky. Now, do you go back and clean up the rest of that tree? Now that emergency services can go through, do you go back and get the stump? Do you go back, at what point do you draw the line from,
Yes.
taxpayer-funded labor to, where do you go from the bare minimum to the next piece of that? And that's the gray area where we always go through with residents, try to explain that to them, but it can be a tall task at
Yes.
times.
It sounds like a tall task. I don't envy you. I think that's all.
You know what we could do? We could add to our annual reminder of how to safely navigate a traffic circle post. We could throw in an annual reminder of what it means to live on an unaccepted street
Absolutely.
post. Let's get a series of these going.
It has been a while since I've been back in front of the board about our roundabouts in town, and I have saved that presentation, so if we need to revisit that, we can.
Perfect. Jim?
Throw it in with the street signs.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
This is an old issue, and I can remember the nightmare I had for a long time was Lake Street. And one of the things that we learned that we did not know is that Lake Street actually had been accepted by the town a long time ago, and no one knew it, and they thought it was an unaccepted road. So I guess, and you may have done this, but you mentioned something that triggered something for me around Lake Street. There are some streets that possibly we could work out where it might be more feasible and economically feasible for us to accept them. And I would think that would be a first step to find those streets that are close, very close, that have minimal expense. I mean, if it's, and obviously this is an unfair analogy, but if it's $10 a year to maintain it and $20 to accept it, we want to accept it, we get Chapter 90 funds for
Absolutely.
it. So there are some benefits to accepting the road. I don't have a magic elixir for this, and I don't think you do either. I completely agree with Anita. I think we all agree that public safety is paramount. That everybody has to be safe. Not up for debate. But that said, you do need to have flexibility. You need to be able to make judgment calls on these situations. I completely agree with Anita on that. I don't know that there's a magic bullet here. The only one that comes to my mind, I am curious why some builders, we hold bonds on these kinds of projects to be finished, and why those bonds weren't used to make that happen. But those are old stories and, probably long past, so it doesn't matter at this point. But there may be some you could work on to become
There are
accepted.
about 10. There are about 10 that
That,
we've
to
looked
me, would be
into,
worth pursuing, if for nothing other than Chapter 90 funds.
Yeah, most of them are fairly recent, meaning within the last 20 years. When you start to get, back into the 90s, you start to lose a lot of that. So, but there are about 10 that we've researched so far of the 42 that we are aggressively going after for, just as you said.
And I do think having some guidelines that people are aware of, like you use the analogy of do we go into the woods and pick up the trees and get rid of the stump and so on. I think the obligation is to keep it open and safe.
Right.
And beyond that, I'm not sure we have a lot more that we can do or should do on an unaccepted road. So I think you should try to work through and come up with some guidelines on that, because I know Lake Street, we spent as much on Lake Street, probably more back in those days in maintaining it than any other road in town, and it wasn't, or we didn't think it was an accepted road. It certainly wasn't accepted by standard, still isn't today. But it's a tough one. And you're right, a lot of people probably bought there not having any knowledge of that, and they have expectations, and I don't know.
And we look at it too.
Wish you the very
When
best
someone
and so to
calls
get
with an
through.
issue, the very first thing we do is pull it up and see where the right-of-way is,
Yeah.
right? Because I want to know at what point do I have authority to work?
How did we put a water main down a street that wasn't accepted?
It's a very good question. I wish I
When you
had
said that,
I-
that shocked me.
Yes.
How did that ever
There was a
happen?
water main in Wiley Road.
And we never
Wow.
accepted the road.
Nope.
That's, wow.
And that one we've researched extensively. That's how I know about all the lots. Some of the lots were joined at one point. That's how they were little postage stamps all the way through there from back in the day. And I anticipate that purely was from, just the way they're laid out, you can see that it was
Yeah.
purely a road frontage thing, because they're,
Usually
100
is.
feet of road frontage. I mean, you lay them right out one after another.
Yeah.
And, but it's steep. If you look at it on paper,
Yeah, I know the
you
road.
don't think anything of it. But that bottom section, it's constantly going up there, and that's the issue. But when I have an issue, the first thing I do is look for the right-of-way. If I have a tree down, if someone comes to me and says, hey, this is a dangerous tree, is it the town's or is it mine? So I go out and look, and legally, if the stump of the tree, if the root system of the tree is in the right-of-way, it's considered a town tree, it's a right-of-way tree. At that point,
We had
it's-
that discussion
Right, we
one
had that
time, I
discussion,
remember.
right, absolutely. And then you go through the steps that have to go through that. But if it's outside, but when you get to an unaccepted road, now there's no barrier there.
There's no
for
right-of-way.
that. So when the tree falls over, technically, it fell from private property to private property, because the landowner typically owns to the center of the road. There is no right-of-way there. So, you go out and you take the center out of it so that a fire truck can get through, but at that point, you're still working on private land wherever you're working. So it creates, legalities, there's liabilities there.
Absolutely.
What if somebody drives off that road and hits a stump, which is now a man-made hazard?
Well, if you could knock off 10, that would be a good start.
Absolutely, and so we're proactively going after that. It's the other 32 that keep me up at night.
I wish you well. There's no elixir to this.
There isn't.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the next step will be a formalization or a documentation of some recommended standards from Blair and Justin, and then you'll bring those before the board for us to be able to review and vote them into policy/guidelines.
Yeah, we would have to submit this as a warrant article, but what we wanted to do, we want to have this preliminary conversation with you all first, say, give us some guidance, are you okay with us pursuing it? We'll have Blair return and we'll give you some proposed guidelines and policies, and if the board agrees with that, then we'll submit an article for the annual town meeting in May.
You said it needed to be an article for town meeting. I'm a little perplexed if we're establishing guidelines.
One, the town has, they said, there's specific bylaw language where the town has to adopt in order to
Mass
do.
general law. There's a mass general law that the town has to adopt, and then from there you set your policy, once you've adopted the statute.
But if you're not, there's a difference between policy and guidelines.
Yes.
So if you're looking at some operational guidelines on how you handle these situations, that, to me, and I'm not the lawyer at the table, but that doesn't constitute a policy.
It doesn't, but this is where the tricky part comes. So the town we can be honest here, the town has been doing things that it probably shouldn't have been doing in terms of doing work on these unaccepted roads because we haven't accepted that
Right.
Mass General law. So what we want to do is we want to correct that, right? Because I think we all want to provide service to these residents on these unaccepted roads. So first, we should accept that Mass General law. So that's why we want to do a town meeting article. But the other reason why we wanted to have a policy guidelines, what it may be, I think once you'll see these proposed policies or they actually are guidelines for us. I think Blair even mentioned before, is to give us some wherewithal and also set expectations, because that's been one of the biggest challenges with some of these residents here of expectations of service. There's only a limit that we can do. So
It could also set up some very interesting dialogue. And it could do the reverse, in my opinion. You could have increased expectations beyond your capacity to meet those expectations once you get this into a warrant article and approved by town meeting. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to do.
Yep.
I was a little confused as to why we had to. If we're not doing a policy, we're just pretty much doing what you're doing. You're just being a little bit more consistent in how you apply it to a certain
Yeah,
degree.
I am concerned with using public money, though, on private ways.
But you're doing it
legally.
now, and there's precedent to that, and that's what you're talking about, is
So at the
precedent has been set.
at the bare minimum, even if the board got these policies or guidelines, however you want to classify it, and the board said, no, we don't want to adopt this, we want to leave it carte blanche, even if we continued, we should do the right thing, accept the Mass General law. So it has to be an article.
Right.
It has to be an article that we consider at town meeting this year, because we're doing something that we shouldn't have been doing previously.
And to be clear, the general law that we'd be proposing to the community to accept would only be for our ability to be able to do work on unaccepted
Correct.
streets. It would not
Excellent.
be about the institution of new guidelines or policies associated to how we do that.
Correct.
That provides more clarity.
Yes,
All right.
that's
Thank you.
exactly, the Mass General Law gives you the authority as a board
Okay.
to then lay out what,
Yeah.
and that's why there's so.
I see that distinction.
That's why they're so
Yeah.
varied throughout the entire Commonwealth.
Gives you some protection.
Right, because then at the local level, you can say, hey, this is right for my community, hey, this isn't right for my community.
Yeah, no, I see the distinction. Thanks.
Exactly. For example, you have some communities say, all right, we're willing to do this work, or unwilling to do. The residents, they have a policy or procedure in place. Residents can submit a request to the
Right.
DPW, has to go through a process. That's what this allows you to do.
And like with road grading, where I had put in here, obviously, with the approval of the Director of Public Works, does give you that out that you're talking about, Jim, where,
Yeah.
this is the guideline or policy, however you want to verbalize it, But, obviously, there's
Yeah,
exceptions to
there has
just about every rule.
There has to be
right?
some impartial standards applied to this
Sure.
that are equal to varying degrees of situation. I can understand that. I didn't get the distinction between that. That's fine. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Is there any legal vehicle for people to be notified when they purchase the home that the road that the home is on is not an accepted road by the town? Is there any legal thing that says that where the previous owner has to notify them that, by the way, this isn't even an accepted road?
You would think so.
We know this very well.
But, yeah, you would think so, but I don't believe so.
There isn't.
We had a situation about 8 or 9 years ago where the planning board actually had a road, a paper road, filed by the planning board, and the road went through the individual's living room.
Oh, excellent.
And we had to get a warrant, we had to put an article on the town meeting warrant to undo that because they couldn't sell their home. So there's crazy stuff out there.
Right.
Yeah. Because it seems like the 10, like if you can get 10 off that list, that's amazing. And then the other people need to be notified that your road isn't approved. And these are the steps your neighbors would need to take together in order to have it. So for them to at least have that in writing, like these are the steps you'd need to do in order to be approved, because that takes it a little bit off of us. And in the meantime, we'll do our best to make sure that emergency services can get to your home if need be.
And there are towns, as I've researched this, there are towns that even go into the weeds and say, okay, this is an unaccepted road. If you get together, every single person on the road has to go to the Board of Selectmen and 100% have to sign a petition saying that the town should come. They fund the cost of whatever needs to be done to the road, and then the town carries out that procedure.
And bills the residents.
And bills the residents.
You do it through a betterment?
You could do it that way. Like I said, there's such a wide variety of ways to go about it. But that's just one, and I did read that. That was
That would be a tricky one.
that would be a tricky one, absolutely.
You'd have some scars from
right,
that.
If you
Yeah.
one neighbor would torpedo the so. But
That
like
would
I
be-
said, it is such a mixed bag of solutions to this problem.
And Mr. Chair, one thing I do want to add, I think what Blair said, I think we know a lot of the residents on these unapproved roads, they know. But we also consider we had a family that recently purchased a property. They had no clue. They had no notice. They just assumed, like I would assume. I learned about unapproved roads here in Norfolk. What we plan on doing as part of, putting guidelines or whatever we may decide, we're going to have that list of unapproved roads on the website, on a link there.
That's a good idea.
So people can have access to that information too.
That's a good idea.
So I think in promotion of those policies, having that publicly available as well, it should help, hopefully, alleviate some of the issues that have emerged.
Good luck.
I may need it. I hopefully will not need it, but we'll continue to work on it. I said it's not an easy fix by any means, and I appreciate the support of the three of you, and Justin's been
Trying to
great.
address it, that's all you could do.
Doing what we can, because it is a problem. There's no question about it, and I'm not convinced that, a lot of other towns have taken a stab at it. Whether or not it's been successful for them, I don't know, but I will continue to chew on it and come back to the board with the best recommendations I can see fit. But I do appreciate, the advice of having that leeway and adding that in there, because, at the end of the day, I hadn't given that a lot of thought. So that was great. I appreciate that.
Very good.
Thank
Look
you,
forward to
sir.
seeing you back. Thank you so much, Blair.
Thank you. You're all set
you.
with me?
Thank you, Mike.
You take care. Have a great night.
You too. All right, that'll bring us to our next item this evening, which is our general updates, primarily and starting with our town administrator. Justin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick bit of information from our town clerk. She's asked me to let the public know that annual town election nomination papers will be available February 15th, and they can feel free to go to website, to her section of the website for more information on seats and deadlines. My next update is regarding our last select board meeting and the opioid application. I just want to let the board know we created an application, a Google Doc application. I sent an email to all individuals who had previously registered interest, letting them know the application was alive. Amanda put it on our website, and I will work with Guilfoyle Relations to publicize that as well. So already people have given some interest, and so I anticipate you'll have some applications before you for your next board meeting.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And so the plan as it stands today is that we would have a voting item, an action item on our next agenda on the 27th to be able to actually allocate specific funding amounts to some of the applications that we received, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And one thing I do want to make sure is pretty clear, and I believe the board's aware of this. So what we did at our past town meetings, we allocated $20,000 of the $46,000 that we've received. So the board has the flexibility to allocate $20,000 for immediate expenditure. And if they want to allocate the remaining amount, you can have a proposed allocation, but it has to be approved at town meeting.
Town meeting, yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
On to select board updates. Jim, I think that you had something you wanted to
I do.
highlight for the group.
Last night, we had our King Philip budget hearing. Justin has seen the numbers. This is not a good year for Plainville, unfortunately. A more tolerable year for us, but the bigger question is really the issue that we're facing overall. I think I mentioned several months ago that we discovered midway through the year that some expenses were not properly reflected in this fiscal year's budget, substantial. And those costs have been compounded by an unusual increase in out-service placements. And so it's created a fairly substantial gap, not only in the operating budget this year, but if we don't address it, it'll compound and exponentially be twice as that bad next year. So we've been working pretty hard on this for the last 2 months. I'm on the finance committee there as well, and we made our presentation because we have to do our budget sooner than anyone else as a regional system. So right now, we made the commitment to stay as close to 4% as we could. But just to give you a feel for what it really means to us, and everybody likes this term level services, but we have not had any new contract negotiations. We haven't had anything that would vary the budget other than fixed cost increases like health insurance and things of that nature. And one of the things I want that most people don't understand is that King Philip is like a fourth town. It's totally independent, and all of the costs associated with that school are absorbed by the King Philip budget. We pay for all of the health insurance. That is not true in the towns for the elementary school. The town pays for the health insurance, not the elementary system. So it's not in their budget, it's in our budget. All of those costs are in the King Philip budget. So it's a very different budgeting process. So when we look at a number like 4%, if you equate that, and I'll give you the exact number, if you equate a 4% increase to King Philip and then look at Norfolk, it would be the equivalent of King Philip having a 2.2% budget increase, because that additional expense are fixed costs that we pay for that the elementary system does not pay for. So it's a little hard and a little convoluted to get those numbers to look proportional, so you can't make an apples-to-apples comparison. But we committed to bringing forward a reasonable and fiscally responsible budget that addresses the gap this year and does not compound the budget process beyond next year. And to do that, we're having to make some really bad decisions. Bad is the wrong word. We're tough decisions, some very tough decisions. If we were just to do business as usual as a result of this gap in a level service, we'd need close to 12%. Not feasible, not practical. We're not engaging in that conversation. So, but the impact of getting close to a 4%, right now we're at 4.3, and we're going to keep working to try and get that below 4. But the impact is fairly dramatic. We are initiating an early retirement incentive. We're hoping that we've had, I think, 7 as of yesterday. We're hoping that we can get 10 teachers. That'll give us a trade of around $20,000 to $30,000 per position. We're not filling any retiring positions. That's aside from early retirement incentives. We're leaving any vacancies we have, we are not filling. And despite all of that, between administration and teaching staff, we're going to end up, we think, somewhere between 12 to 14 layoffs. There's no way around it. There's no other way you can do this, because fixed expenses are non-negotiable. There's just no magic elixir to this, and it's unfortunate. Our superintendent has done, and his principals have done really an incredible job in mitigating the impact, so we're confident that there will be no impact to the students. It will include administrators. This is not, this is across the board where we're looking at every opportunity we can to reduce these costs. Very, very hard decisions, but it is all focused on, it's all student-centered. All cuts are irrelevant of what we think will impact the student, and or not impact the student, I should say. But they're tough decisions. We're hoping it'll be less than 12 to 14. It all depends on how the early retirement system, incentive plays out. Governor's budget will have some impact. We always know that's a little different. Transportation continues to be underfunded at the regional level. We are hoping those numbers will get a little bit better. We're even looking at school choice, opening the school for outside students. We have room in the 7th and 9th grade. We could take new students in, so we're anticipating, that has not been voted by the school committee, but it's on the table. We've never done it. I'm not sure whether that would be acceptable or not, but we're looking at every single option to try and mitigate the number of cuts that we have to make in the system. It's been one of the most, of all the years I've been involved in school budgets, this has been the most painful. But we're going at it the right way. We're not ignoring it, and we're not asking for numbers we know we can't get. So I think that I want to compliment really the administration, and has done an outstanding job in working through these concerns. We're looking at every single aspect. We are not increasing user fees. We're not going to do any of those things that impact our families and students. These are all going to be internal issues that we have to work our way through. We're not touching sports. That game has been played in the past. We will not play that game. Our budget will be fully transparent, and it will be respectful of the fact that we have communities that also have financial considerations, as we do here in Norfolk. Plainville is getting hit with a little over 11% assessment this year. We're under 4. Now, we got hit with close to 11 last year. So it's kind of like Russian roulette. Rentham, first time I have ever seen a negative number for Rentham. God bless them. Their enrollment is down. And, that's just the way the formula works. Plainville is up. Norfolk is a little up, but not much. But Rentham is significantly down. And that impacts the calculations.
Jim, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Understanding that Plainville is currently housing around 56 migrant families, and some of those students or some of those children have been attending KP, how much of that is an impact on this recent assessment?
Well, in theory, there's reimbursement for that. Keep that in mind. The state supposedly, and I don't know the number because it's Plainville, but my understanding is we are being reimbursed for that. So I don't know whether it's a fair trade, because it's never quite the same way. Like if we take a student in, we get $5,000. And this $11,000 average per student is not a fair way to look at this. That's no more than the kids by the budget, and it doesn't make sense. But if there are students that need outplacement services, we are fully reimbursed for that. So I'm not quite sure how that works for the students, other than I know we are reimbursed. As to whether it's full 100% on the dollar, I do not know that. But it does impact the formula. It's not a complicated, it is in some sense, but it's not in other sense. It's the single driver is student population.
Yeah.
And then there's a wealth factor. Basically it's the town's ability to generate revenue is the other factor, variable, and Plainville is in a growth stage. Yeah. They have a lot of good commercial, a lot of good things happening there, and I'm happy for them. I mean, this is a good thing. But it comes back to kind of catch them a little bit on the KP budget. So these are very difficult decisions. We have another meeting on Monday where we're going to fine-tune this, but we're going to be around 4% in that neighborhood. 4.33 actually, truthfully, right now. But we're shooting for 4. But we may, I don't know how much more we can pull from this. They have looked very carefully at every potential loss of staff to be sure that it does not impact the classroom. That all programs will continue to be available, in fact, new programs. And, we have teachers in place that can do both. So nothing is going to change in terms of the academic considerations that are available to the students, and that has been our priority.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Be a reduction in administrators as well as teaching staff, too. So, tough year for a new superintendent to come
Really
into
tough.
and find out he has a deficit he knew nothing about.
Well, I mean, I think many in the community appreciate how transparent and upfront he's been about what he's discovered, what he's seen, and the
Yep.
ways that he's going about
No
dealing
point in
with
hiding it. It is what it is. And the committee, as well as the superintendent, we are committed to full transparency. We can't, we don't want to hide anything. It's their dollars. They have a right to see where every dollar goes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the update, Jim. Really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
no, it's, I can't say it's been a labor of love, but it's.
It's been a labor nonetheless.
What has made it tolerable is the professionalism and the expertise of the administrative staff.
Absolutely.
That's what made this work. And I'm sure you'd stay the same for Norfolk and every other school.
Absolutely.
These folks are very, very clever, very creative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good, hardworking, honest folks.
Yep. I'm meeting with Ingrid tomorrow to have
Yep.
similar conversations, so.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, thank you.
Anita, did you have anything for updates
I
tonight?
do not have any updates this evening.
Very good. And then in that case, we'll be moving on to our next item tonight, which is the report of the warrants. Do I have a motion to approve?
I move to accept the warrants as printed in the agenda.
Second.
Hearing a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. That is unanimous. And finally, we have approval of minutes, Anita.
I move to approve the minutes of the meeting on December 5th, 2023.
Second.
Hearing a second. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Justin, anything else for us tonight before we break?
No, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Well, in that case, I will accept a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Hearing a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. That is unanimous. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.